Good morning, everyone. I'm Alicia, and I'm a grateful recovering sex and love addict. And so happy to be with you all today to talk about sober dating. So let's go ahead and begin with the Serenity Prayer. God,
God,
grant me the
grant
serenity
me serenity
to accept
to
the
accept
things
the
I
things I
cannot
cannot
change,
change,
courage to
courage to
change,
change the things I can,
I
and the
can, and the
wisdom to know the
wisdom to know
difference.
the difference. Thy will not mine be done.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. So I am just so glad each of you are here and those who are listening to this recording, because I am a dyed-in-the-wool sex and love addict. And so a conversation about sober dating is so important. And today I have 10 years and 8 months to the day of sobriety in this program. And thank you. I love it. Thank you. What I realize is that with the coronavirus, the program has just exploded in a good way, because many of you aren't near meetings and you're able to get to multiple meetings in a day, which is fantastic. And so there weren't sober dating workshops when I got in the program. As a matter of fact, no one in my area was sober dating when I began sober dating. And I had a sponsor off and on. One of my best sponsors went AWOL on me in the middle of a trip I was taking for the first time with a man I was dating. It was hard. This sober dating stuff needs a lot of support and a lot of really dedicated recovery. And so, we say, you hear in the meetings a lot, I'm cleared for dating, like I'm cleared for landing, I'm cleared for dating. Well, you can go down that checklist and be cleared for dating and actually not ready at all. And so this is why I wanted to invite women who are brand new or who aren't anywhere close to dating, who are scared of dating, and everything in between, even married women. Like what we're going to be talking about today is all of that, because I had to learn how to be a woman of dignity and integrity and grace. That wasn't natural to me in dating. I could do that in a lot of different circumstances. But when it came to dating, I was a rip roaring sex and love addict and let her roll. The crazier it got, the more fun I thought it was. And it just always went downhill. And so, anyway, I just want to share that I do come from a family that was very abusive. My mother was a very toxic narcissist and could never give me a compliment or an acknowledgement. She could only give me criticism and judgment and violent physical abuse. When I was just I might have been 5 years old. I don't know. I think I was 5 because it was in the same house that I was sexually abused in. But she would just beat the crap out of me and hold my head under a pillow and just beat me. And, to this day, it's a mystery to me, like what I had done that was so bad. And you and I both know I probably didn't do anything that was so bad. She was just really sick and took a lot of that out on me. And we also moved from the farm in Luther, Oklahoma. I was born in Luther, Oklahoma. I went back to visit when I was back there in May, and it is the tiniest little town. But that's where my family lived when I was born. And when I was 5, we moved into the city. And that was a really big deal for my family. We were on the dairy farm where my mom was raised and milking cows and raising chickens. So to move to the city was a big deal. And but it was problematic for me because we moved into a 3-bedroom home, and each of my brothers, who were 10 and 11 years older than me, were given their own room. and I was told to sleep with my brothers, who were 10 and 11 years older than me. And both of them abused me. And so I told my parents I didn't want to sleep with them. And my parents had me sleep in their bed with them, at which they proceeded to have sex with me in the bed. And I just couldn't understand what was happening in the middle of the night when I woke up. And so I knew it wasn't good. I knew I wasn't supposed to be seeing it or hearing it or feeling it. And so I said I didn't want to sleep in the bed with them either. So ultimately, they said to sleep on the sofa. It never dawned on these people to give me my own room. Oh my God. We just perpetuate abuse. My mom was abused and she just continued it on. And unknowingly, I know that, unconsciously. So anyway, I said I didn't want to sleep on the sofa because while my one brother only did it one time, and I don't in any way want to minimize it, but it was mild compared to what my older brother, he pursued me, he was violent, and he was very abusive. So I knew he would come at me if I was asleep on the sofa in the night. So anyway, I ended up on a coffee table. They moved into the bedroom at the foot of my parents' bed on a coffee table in a sleeping bag. Now, that just doesn't make sense to me, but it tells me how absolutely insignificant, unimportant, and disrespected I was. Like I didn't matter in that household. So when I have feelings, like my core wounds are all around, I don't matter. And that's why. And I've done a lot of healing work on that so that I don't have to feel like I don't matter anymore. And so being raised in that kind of household, I got very blessed that both of my brothers went away to a boarding school when they were still, 16-ish. And so I'm guessing that the abuse went on for about a year. But I don't know for certain. But it was way more than one time. And, my brother told me he definitely would kill me if I told mom and dad. And he was so violent with me that I thought that was a possibility. So anyway, it's very important that I share this with you because it impacts all of my other relationships. Because in this household where my brothers were allowed to be abusive and call me slave, like this blows my mind, is that they were allowed to call me their slave. Slave, go get me a Dr. Pepper. Slave, go make me a piece of toast. Like, how does this even happen? But they weren't taught to respect and protect me. So that concept of older brothers who protect their little sister, nope, not in our house. So anyway, I had a lot of healing to do. It's no wonder I was a sex and love addict. And so as I got into those dating years and even before that, I just knew that this little fairy tale in my heart that someone was going to love me someday the way that I wanted my parents to love me, and my dad was very loving. He just didn't protect me. The only time he protected me was when my mom had me in a corner and she was beating me with a belt and I was screaming. And finally he said, "Now, Rita, that's enough." But that was the one time that he protected me from her. And he would say over the years, as I was needing help so bad. And he would always say, everybody would say this, her sisters, my aunts, my brothers, everybody would say, "But she really loves you, but she has a good heart, but she means well." Well, forgive my French, but fuck that. Because no, it doesn't matter that she's my mom. She didn't mean well. She didn't have a good heart towards me. And, it was very abusive. So the only day I ever saw my dad cry was, I was in my 20s and I had gone back to Oklahoma City from California to actually go through my college graduation. And he said these things because I had gone to their house and she wouldn't even open the door, you know, because I wasn't doing the things that she wanted. She wanted me to stay at their house that trip. And it was not self-loving for me to stay in that home. And so he came to visit me at my friend's home where I was staying. And he said those things again. You know, she really loves you. She has a good heart and she means well. And so I said to him, Dad, I'm so sorry, but I never want to hear you say those words to me again. And even he knew they weren't true, because that was the only time I ever saw tears come down my dad's face, was at that time. So as I got into those dating years, I was looking for lava, love, attention, validation, and approval. You know, my journey really was in sex and love addiction, just looking for someone to give me very basic needs that my mother certainly couldn't give me. And so, you know, I began the whole roller coaster experience, like really looking up to someone so much, you know, thinking, like idealizing so incredibly that this person was going to, you know, heal me, to take care of me, and to love me like I'd never been loved before. And it just never worked out that way. You know, I was really, really needy. And as I got into high school and discovered, you know, sexuality, and I'll never forget the first boy that we French kissed, and like, wow, blew his mind. And I saw all the power that my body had over him. Like, damn, this is powerful. This is some powerful stuff. And so just began to use that. But the key point was when I was 19 and I did discover Overeaters Anonymous. And it is no joke that the 12 steps saved my life, because I was able to get into a journey of recovery. It's true when they say that the credits don't transfer, because I've worked the steps in recovery diligently for, you know, over 30 years. But when I finally realized I needed SLAA, it didn't matter. All I knew was that the steps worked. None of it, it was like I was a newcomer. I treated myself like a newcomer. I didn't act like I knew jack shit, because I didn't know anything about recovering from sex and love addiction. I just knew the steps worked, and I knew that fellowship worked. That's why I think it's so awesome when we come together and we're able to have our cameras on and we're able to see each other as women, and we don't feel alone. You know, we're all in our little pockets around the globe, but it's so powerful to know that, first of all, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but sex and love, like, I'm not a nympho. I don't, why do I have to show up to this program that I have to say I'm that name? And so, you know, it's really important that we get to see we're not weird women. You know, like someone will write to me when I'm on a meeting and say, wow, it was so great to see you. You look so happy and you look so normal. Like they're expecting us to just be these, you know, whacked out women. And I was a whacked out woman. So, but thank goodness that the steps work. And so, you know, I ended up marrying, you know, a man who was 20 years my senior. And I married him because I didn't know how to break up with him. I tried to break up with him and he just wouldn't let me break up with him. And so had to marry him. And, you know, we say so frequently, oh, he was emotionally unavailable. I mean, this man was so emotionally unavailable. It was unbelievable. Like I was his whole life. It was me. But guess what? I was emotionally unavailable too. How often do we ever hear one of us say, I'm emotionally unavailable? You know, like we point the finger and that's called JRD, justification, rationalization, and denial. You know, I was the one. I mean, he was too, by all means, but it's not like he was some villain because he was so emotionally unavailable. You know, I was spending most of my time, I was in college and I was working my way through college at a cosmetic counter for the Estee Lauder organization. And then I was in meetings. So I was busy like working to heal, and it didn't matter to him at all. He never said, "Oh no, honey, please don't go to that meeting," because he was emotionally unavailable. So it gave him the chance to, you know, sit and watch TV. But here's what he was. He was a good man. And so when it came time for me to really realize that our relationship wasn't working after 10 years, and a lot of that had to do with my sex and love addiction, because he was perfectly happy being sexual, you know, maybe 3 times a month. And for that to just be pretty, you know, like unavailable sex. And I just remember crying, and not crying from any kind of physical pain, but crying from an emotional pain, and that we didn't have that special connection. And part of that, I have to know, is not just because I'm a sex and love addict. You know, like God gave us all different sexual desires and different sexual, you know, appetites. And I'm not about to allow the addiction part of that to be contaminated and like judge myself, as long as I'm living a sober life, you know, and a healthy life. So when he and I divorced, I found somebody like exactly the opposite. Oh my God. We were having way too much rip roaring sex. And, but I wasn't smart enough around addiction to understand it meant nothing. You know, and eventually I could see that outside the bedroom, actually, not even outside the bedroom, if we were vertical, we didn't get along. As long as we were horizontal, we got along. And once we became vertical, all bets were off. We just couldn't get along, and I couldn't see how dangerous that was. It took me a lot of years to realize he was just a personification of my mother and her narcissism. Is that, you know, one of the worst things about narcissists is if you're crying, inside they're laughing. That just really ticks me off. And to see it, you know, some of our arguments would be late at night and I couldn't sleep. He'd lay down and go straight to sleep. And then I'd just go crazy. Like that would make me so crazy. Like my feelings are hurt and now you're going to sleep. So they're dangerous people not to be messed around with. And that's why this workshop and any sober dating workshop is really important for us to be able to learn how to spot those kinds of dangerous people to us and move on. So he and I married, and it was a disaster pretty much from the minute we got back from our honeymoon, because he was the kind of man that he checked off the box, got the girl, and we're married now. And he's off to the next project, you know, whatever he was up to. It wasn't marriage, but he did convince me that he wanted a child, you know, and so we'd tried to, you know, get pregnant. And right away, within 3 months, I had an ectopic pregnancy and almost died. It's where the pregnancy gets caught in the tube or stuck in the tube. And then it grows in the tube. And I was traveling a lot for work at that time. And I just fell incredibly ill, but we couldn't figure it out. And then, you know, a doctor determined that that's what happened. And so they removed the pregnancy, and I was restricted to bed rest, like don't get out of bed for 3 days. And his office, his business was literally 5 minutes from our house, like walking distance from our house. And he would not come back to fix me breakfast, lunch, dinner, anything. It was like truly, I was out of sight, out of mind. And that was the first rude awakening, is like, holy shit, I'm in big trouble. I have married somebody who really doesn't care about me at all. And of course, at that point, it was trying to get him to care. Now I'm going to figure out how to get him to care about me. And that, I thought, okay, if I become a sexual 3-ring circus, that'll make him love me more. And that was insane. And I just couldn't. And so it made me so upset that we would fight a lot until the day that I found, I looked at our phone bill, and I'd been out of town and I was just paying bills, I'm just going through things, and I'm seeing just a sequence of calls at like 2 a.m. And I called one of the numbers, and it was a call girl, like, hi, this is Amber, and, get ready. Like, oh shit. And anyway, I immediately stopped having sex with him. But by this time, I was so blessed to have a little boy. So Kenny is a miracle child, because for 3 years, we tried to get pregnant after I had that ectopic pregnancy, and I had 3 miscarriages. I had 2 miscarriages plus the ectopic pregnancy, and it was heartbreaking to go through that. So anyone else who's gone through miscarriages and lost pregnancies, it's really hard. So my heart goes out to you. But Kenny was 11 months old when I discovered this stuff. Or maybe he was like 8 or 9 months, because I stayed as long as I could. And then I just had to leave. One day I was sitting there after I discovered all those phone numbers, and I was nursing Kenny. And, this is supposed to be such a special experience. This is supposed to be a beautiful time in your life. And I was so absolutely miserable. And, I've got Kenny here, and I'm crying, and these tears of coming down my cheeks, and they're landing on Kenny's cheeks. And that was one of those moments. It's like, I just can't do this. I have to move on. And so through a series of events, one of the most fun days of my life was I packed up all his shit and I took it down to his boat. And I was literally ready to throw the stuff in the water when one of his deckhands came out. I said, okay, Juan, will you please get all this stuff out of the back of my car? And anyway, he unloaded the stuff, but it just began a horrible, horrible journey of divorcing a narcissist who all he wanted to do was get even. So for those of you who have struggled through divorces with somebody who just would rather you die, would rather, if they could kill you and get away with it, they would, or to watch you suffer. That's what it was. It was a horrible, horrible time to have a baby. And not long after that, 9/11 happened, which I lost all of my work at that time because I was working in hospitality. And so, I went to my first SLAA meeting around that time, trying to save the marriage. And I just couldn't stomach it. I, first of all, didn't think I was that bad yet. Sorry, ladies. I didn't think I was that bad. And the worst thing was we didn't have women's meetings where I was located. And I'm sitting in meetings who are just like my toxic ex. They're talking about their porn addictions. They're talking about their masturbation issues. They're talking about all this stuff. And it just sent me through the roof. Like, how can I sit here with these people? And the porn, when I discovered the porn in my house, it was under the sink when one of the plumbers was going to come and fix the sink that day. And then I just went through the house and it was everywhere. Anywhere you could hide something, there was something porn. And it was the kind of porn you don't find at your local 7-Eleven. It was the kind of porn you have to order. It was bad porn. And so I've had to leave workshops because speakers can't stop talking about their porn addictions. And it just is so triggering to me because I was married to that. And when he got the truck that had the video in it, there's porn videos in his truck. So super, super hard. So my hat's off to everyone who struggles with porn addiction. I know it is very, very addicting. So I certainly don't have judgments. But at that time, it was still so raw and festering. And so I went 14 more years after that first SLAA meeting. And Pia Melody's book, Facing Love Addiction, really helped me to get out of that marriage. I not only read the book, I studied the book. I kept reading it. I would print things out because we were volatile by the end. And she tells you how not to engage and how not to get in arguments and how to keep your mouth shut. And that was so helpful because I thought every thought I thought needed to be said. And I was just hurting so bad. So it took a long time for me to get to SLAA. And I began a healing journey long before that around my sexual abuse. I had gone to very special psychotherapy that helped me confront all of my family. I made phone calls to each of my brothers. And I said, I'm calling you today because do you remember when you did A, B, and C? And the one brother said, yes, I do. And I'm very sorry. I would never want to hurt you. I love you. You're too important to me. If I could have like choreographed it or scripted it, it couldn't have gone better. The other brother was like, well, if I don't remember, but if I did, I'd be really sorry. And Jesus is coming and you need to repent your sins and you need to make your relationship right with mom. And it's like, sorry, but what I really need to do is get off this call with you. And I didn't hang around there long, but I said it, you guys, I said it to my perpetrator. And he was a violent perpetrator to a little 5-year-old girl when he was 16 years old. I knew for damn straight that he remembered every minute and everything he did to me. And then I called my mom. These were over months. And, I told my mom that I was in Overeaters Anonymous and that I realized that my food addiction was really part of the cause of it was the sexual abuse I experienced. And I told her about, brother number one. I told her about brother number two. And I said, and she's dead silent. And I said, and, I really feel like this is what caused my eating disorder. And she goes, oh, I've got a good cabbage soup recipe for you. You take, 2 cups of water, and my jaws dropped. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. My mom, I'm just telling her about my sexual abuse. And now my mom's giving me a cabbage soup recipe. And I didn't have a lot of skills at communication at that time. I got a lot of good communication skills now. And I said, well, Mom, now's not the time for that. And she had nothing else to say to me ever about it. And I called my dad. This was, again, maybe a couple of weeks. I'd go back to therapy and I'd say, this is what happened. And part of the therapy was that I had to be prepared for them to say, you're lying. You deserved it. We're disowning you. You're going to go straight to hell and burn forever. Like, don't you ever speak about, I had to go through all of the scenarios of what might happen. And so each week I would go back and review things. And so the last call was to my dad. And in a certain way, that was hardest. And, I told him what happened. And he said, listen to this, damn those boys, I'm going to have a talk with them. And of course, he never had a talk with them, but at least his response was somewhere close to as loving and evolved as possible, So anyway, that was one of the most powerful things ever for me because I was given permission when I did my 4-step with my OA sponsor, and she said, it wasn't your fault, Alicia. It's not your fault. So if anyone is here today or listening on our recording, it's not your fault. I don't care what they did. I don't care what you did. I don't care how old you were. Women who are abused older, they take on way more because they say they should have known better. But the manipulation and the coercion and all of that is so intense. But we do get to heal. We get to heal from the abuse. We get to heal from the violence. And we talk about trauma a lot. And, it's a spectrum, but pretty much anything that's not loving and supportive and kind and warm in your family of origin is trauma. And so that was really hard for me to embrace because I lived through it. I lived in a war zone when I was a little girl. You never knew when my mom was going to throw something at you or slap you across the face. And yelling and cussing was just common. So it took a long time for me to really see that not only was the sexual abuse I encountered and her violent abuse traumatizing, but just the environment. And so healing from a lot of that is very, very challenging. So when I got to SLAA, it was because of a dating situation. I met a guy on eHarmony and he told me he loved me before we even met. He was sending me long emails and this was the cat's meow. I mean, this is what I'm longing for. He is just so discombobulated that, he's a big executive in some hotshot company and his coworkers are going, "Are you okay?" And he's saying, "No, I'm in love." And I'm in California and he's in Calgary and I'm thinking, wow, this is it. This is it. And the first time we met, it was just plain and boring. And he wasn't the same person in texting and emailing and Skyping and that he was in person. He was pretty darn dull and boring. And I need to be jacked up. I needed to have all that energy and really addictive stuff because I'm addicted to the adrenaline of it all too. And so our second time we met was in San Francisco and I had a trade with a client of mine that had a hotel right there on Union Square. And so it was his birthday and we're in and around San Francisco and he's completely cold to me. He's shopping for a birthday present for his mom and dragging me through all these stores and ignoring me unless we're sitting down eating or unless we're having sex. And I was wigging out because I wasn't getting love, attention, validation, or approval from him, 16 hours a day. And I remember walking up the steps to Grace Cathedral, sobbing, thinking, what am I going to do with my life? I'm going to go back to that meeting. I don't care what I have to say. I don't care what I have to hear. This is 14 years later now. And I'm going to go back because I need help bad. I was so distraught. And I got to my first meeting the next night. And that day was actually a semi-sober day because when we got to the airport the day before, it was on a Tuesday and March the 20th. And my flight left before his. So he dropped me off and, I was waiting and the phone rang and it was him. And, he's waiting for his flight at the next terminal. And my first sober moment. I didn't know it was a sober moment, but it was a sober moment. And I thought, no, hell no, I am not picking up that phone. I just had 4 miserable days in one of my favorite cities in the world, and you don't get to talk to me now. And I listened to the message, and it was such a manipulation. It was Oh, Alicia, I'm so sorry. I didn't adequately let you know what a great time I had with you the last 4 days. And thank you for making my birthday so special and all this crap. And so I got back to California and I went to my first meeting the next night and the lights were on. I was in the dark and there was a women's meeting. So I'm such a huge advocate for women's meetings. There were 20 women in that room live. And they were singing my song and telling my story. And I looked around that room and I thought, I'm going to live. I'm going to live. And I'm going to be okay because they were okay. And I thought, all this stuff that I've been a victim of, I don't have to be a victim forever. And I get to heal. And I didn't for 1 second let any thought of work I'd done on the 12 steps in any other program come into my mind. I am a flat on my butt newcomer and I am going to do anything that these people tell me to do. And it was hard to find a sponsor, but I eventually did. I've had, 4 or 5 sponsors. I'm so grateful because I've got a great sponsor now and I've had her for well over 5 years now. But finding a sponsor is tough, and but it's worth it. It's really worth it to feel that support. And when I began sober dating, at that point, I didn't have somebody who was able to help me put a dating plan together very well. But I felt like if I worked my SLAA program like I was taught to work my OA program, because I had a black belt sponsor who was sponsored by an AA priest who was a circuit speaker, and he was an OA too, but we had strong directives. Like, it is 90 meetings in 90 days. You call your sponsor every day. You call 2 other people every single day. And I did that. I got into SLAA, and I just did that. I started making phone calls. I didn't know what we were going to talk about, but I just was really dedicated. And at about a year in, there were 2 girls in the meetings and they said, Alicia, will you sponsor? They ganged up on me, you guys. They came up to me after the meeting and they said, will you sponsor us? And I'm like, I can't sponsor you. I don't know what I'm doing. And they're like, yes, you do. But they had me backed in a good corner, but they said there's nobody to sponsor. And there wasn't. We were the blind leading the blind. So it's so awesome to see so much recovery in our meetings today. And so I said, plus I don't have time. I said, well, I could create a worksheet that would be like a study guide of this is everything you do. And then we can talk when we can. And one of the girls, she goes, oh, that'd be great. That would be like a syllabus. She's a college student at the time. That'd be a sponsoring syllabus. That'd be great. I still have the sponsoring syllabus and happy to share it. But I just started sponsoring, and I got to tell you, that saved the day, getting on the phone with each of those women and, eventually getting my own sponsor obviously is really important. But going through the sober dating, and I've had 6 sober relationships, probably 100 sober dates. And at first it's really wobbly. It's very challenging. And so, it doesn't happen perfectly. It just doesn't. And so, but being able to be patient and giving ourselves grace, knowing when to give grace, knowing when to give love, knowing when to go, red alert, back up the bus, don't go any further. Knowing all of that is such a trial and error, and being honest with other women in recovery and not shamed. It's amazing. I hear, people feeling shamed around, 12 steps, and I have not ever once felt shamed. And, I think it's very important that we create a foundation where we can speak about sexuality and sensuality and dating and our little antics. While I was in Florida earlier in the summer, I was doing some sober dating there, and I saw some of my old little antics come out. One of my signature moves was playing footsie with some guy under the table on our first date. And, because it's fun, it's flirty. And that's what I wanted to be, was fun and flirty. And I was sitting there with this guy, and I just like had that urge. And it's like, oh no, we don't do that anymore. And it was shocked, like, what's going on here? It's like, I feel awkward. So that tells me was one of my deals I would do when I felt awkward. I just didn't know how to be awkward. Okay, I'm awkward. Oh no, let's take awkward and turn it into sexual. So that's what one of our characteristics is that we sexualize everything. So it's great to not have to do that. One of those sober dating experiences was with a covert pathological narcissist. And I didn't see the train coming initially, but when I started seeing signs, he could compliment me for everything and anything except my intelligence or my business acumen. And I didn't pick up on it right away, because at that time, part of what I was doing is I was doing leadership development training in a superwoman costume on stages for the top Marriotts around the world. And he and I met, and I quickly went on one of those business trips. And I sent him photos of me in this superwoman costume on stage. And he never said a word about it. Now, even if, how do you not comment on that? Like the comment I expected to come back, you all know the comment I expected to come back is like, well, when do I get to see that? Like, when are you going to put that on for me? And it was dead silence. And so, the next day or so, I said, hey, did you get those pictures I sent? And he goes, yeah, I did. I said, oh, okay. I just, I didn't hear anything from you. And he goes, yeah, they were nice. And so, like the disease of love addiction was arrested enough that I can see clearly, like that's what we're looking for. The things I'm going to share with you today, we want the disease of love addiction specifically. For a lot of us, the love addiction we lead with love addiction, and then bam, that sex addiction kicks in because we got to keep the guy. That's how mine works. I don't want to say that that's how yours works, but it took me a long time to figure that out. Like, I'm sitting here saying I'm a sex and love addict. Am I really? Oh yeah. So, but it doesn't lead. I don't lead with it. So anyway, when I started putting the pieces together, and I invited him on one of my business trips with me, and we had dinner with the general manager of the W Hotel in Scottsdale. And he acted like a moron. Like, who is this guy? And I swear to you, I would never in 1,000 years think that somebody would try to sabotage business like that. Like, that's one of my most prized business connections to this day. And this guy, he's looking at the TV the whole time. He's staring at the TV. He's criticizing the he's just being a moron. Anyway, I began to put it all together, and I was in and out of there in 2 months, ladies. 2 months. But you don't break up with a narcissist by telling them what's wrong, because you're going to get in a really bad situation. You're going to end up in an argument, and it's just going to be a disaster, or they're going to come on even stronger. Like, oh no, we can work this out, baby. No, let's, the monster will come out in the lamb's clothing. And so, I was able to share something honest, which was simply that, my son was getting older. And as he got older, there were things I wanted to pursue. Like, I wanted to pursue my spirituality. I just finished a 10-day silent meditation retreat. So this was true, even though this was 4 or 5 years ago. I want to pursue more spirituality. And he just wasn't, he could act like he was into that, to go along with it enough to like lure me in, but then not actually. So I said I wanted to pursue my spirituality more, and then also just my personal growth. I'm a communication expert, and I really want to, dive more into communication. I want to dive more into healing my core wounds. And those are things I'm really deeply interested in. And so, I'd written him a letter saying those things, that I didn't feel like we were a good long-term match. And he dropped his head and he looked up very sympathetic. And then he dropped his head again and he looked up evil, like an evil person had arrived. And all he did was motion me to the door, just motion me to the door. And I stood and I went to the door, and he had one of my books that I really wanted, and I saw it on the shelf. And I said, do you mind if I take that book? Because he wasn't interested in it. It was about communication. I got the book and I said, is there anything you want to say? I'm happy to talk through anything. And he wouldn't even open his mouth. He just motioned to the door. But a few days later, he started texting, wanting everything he'd given me. I mean, these were ball gowns and lots of jewelry and shoes, and none of it was expensive anything. And so it was just the evil. It was the evil part of him. So sober dating, we have to be able to handle chaotic breakups, crisis breakups, like how we date and how we break up are both really important, because I married two men that I didn't know how to break up with. Today, I know how to break up. I know how to break up with dignity and grace. But that doesn't mean it's easy. And it's, I know how to be able to go through those other withdrawals, like the withdrawals that we go through after our initial withdrawal. They're not as painful, and they certainly aren't as long, but we get to go through those too. But it's so much about our fellowship. It's about the women in the rooms and being really connected to each other. So I want to thank you all for listening. We're going to dive into this article